This is Andrew Yang. He's a lawyer turned tech entrepreneur who's running for president for some reason. Yang participated in the second night of the first Democratic presidential debate of the 2020 cycle and was up against some heavy hitters.
We're with Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Kamala, Pete Buttigieg. It's going to obviously be the much more viewed night.
This was a big opportunity for Yang to introduce himself to voters, so let's see how he did.
Mr. Yang, your signature policy is to give every adult in the United States $1,000 a month, no questions asked.
That's right.
Okay, Yang, this is your moment. You've been asked about universal basic income probably like 50 billion times. You got this.
I think that's like $3.2 trillion a year. How would you do that?
Sorry?
How would you do that?
Unfortunately, the explanation on how to fund UBI is complicated, and Yang doesn't have a lot of time here. All he needs to do is keep it as simple as possible, but instead...
Oh, so it's difficult to do if you have companies like Amazon, trillion-dollar tech companies paying literally zero in taxes while they're closing 30% of our stores.
First off, Amazon is not a trillion-dollar tech company. In fact, as of July 2019, Microsoft is the only American company that has a market cap of over $1 trillion. Also, how many trillion-dollar tech companies does Andrew Yang think exist? Second, why would you start off your answer by taking a swipe at Amazon when they're the type of company that's going to help you fund your freedom dividend?
Now, we need to put the American people in position to benefit from all these innovations in other parts of the economy. And if we had a value-added tax at even half the European level, it would generate over $800 billion in new revenue.
Most Americans have no idea what a value-added tax is or how it even works. But regardless, if the freedom dividend has a cost of $3.2 trillion, $800 billion in tax revenue doesn't even begin to cover it. So where are we getting the rest of this money from?
Which, combined with the money in our hands, it would be the trickle-up economy from our people, families, and communities up. We would spend the money and it would circulate through our regional economies and neighborhoods, creating millions of jobs, making our families stronger and healthier. We'd save money on things like incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room health care.
If you've never heard of Yang or UBI, and this is the first time you're hearing all of this, it's incredibly confusing.
And just the value gains from having a stronger, healthier, mentally healthier population would increase GDP by $700 billion.
A $700 billion GDP increase is not equal to $300 billion in tax revenue. In other words, he's doing a terrible job at answering the question.
So you're saying $1,000 a month for everyone over 18, but a value-added tax, so you can spend that $1,000 on value-added tax?
Jose Diaz-Balart knows that that's not how it works, but he doesn't care to ask a legitimate follow-up question, and this throws Yang off a little.
Well, the value-added tax would end up, you'd still be increasing the buying power of the bottom 94% of Americans.
So what he's saying is that if people have extra money, they will use it to buy more things? Talk about stating the obvious. The bottom line is that Yang can't explain how to pay for it, and that's disappointing. The whole point of this is to introduce Yang to millions of Americans who have never heard of him or his policy plans. So later, moderator Chuck Todd presents the candidates with the following scenario.
You may only get one shot, and your first issue that you're going to push, you get one shot that it may be the only thing you get passed. What is that first issue for your presidency, Mr. Yang?
I would pass a $1,000 freedom dividend for every American adult starting at age 18, which would speed us up on climate change, because if you get the boot off of people's throats, they'll focus on climate change much more clearly.
Wow, did you hear that reaction from the audience?
Freedom dividend for every American adult starting at age 18, which would speed us up on climate change.
For most Democrats, having the government give everyone $12,000 a year is not a priority. Not to mention that this is something that would have to be passed by Congress, and that's never, ever going to happen. The freedom dividend is not a legitimate policy plan, it's a pipe dream. Anyway, according to the Washington Post, out of the 20 candidates in the debate, he enjoyed the least amount of speaking time.
You accused NBC of cutting your mic off at times when you wanted to interject. NBC has denied that's happened, but it's a big conspiracy all over the internet. Can you clarify what happened?
Well, I was only asked 2 questions over 2 hours, and that's, like, there for everyone to see. And so I just shared my experience with some supporters after the fact. And there were also a few times, FYI, where I just started talking, being like, hey, I'd like to add something there, and my mic was, like, not on. Like, it's the sort of thing where it's not like if you just start talking, like, it all of a sudden, like, takes over the convo. It's like I was talking and, like, nothing was happening.
But then he goes further and tweeted that his mic was turned off unless he was called on. So Yang's lack of airtime and the statement about the microphone led Yang supporters to create the hashtag #LetYangSpeak. So let's see if we can debunk this conspiracy theory.
I was only asked 2 questions over 2 hours.
That's not quite true. He answered 4 questions that were directed to him. Granted, these 2 were designed to elicit short responses.
What is the first relationship you like to reset as president? Mr. Yang, we're trying to squeeze in a couple more things before we go to another break. Mr. Yang.
China, we need to cooperate with them on climate change, AI, and other issues. North Korea.
Thanks for the quickness.
Thanks for the quickness. And if you haven't guessed, it's one of the reasons why Yang had the least airtime. Yang answered his question in just 4 seconds, but other politicians like former Governor John Hickenlooper took 15 seconds.
You know, I talk about constant engagement, and I think the first country I would go to, and I understand they've been cheating and stealing intellectual property, would be China, because if we're going to deal with public health pandemics, if we're going to deal with all the challenges of the globe, we've got to have relationships with everyone.
You see, it's hard to compete for airtime when you're sharing a debate stage with 8 professional grandstanders and 1 crazy person.
What is that first issue for your presidency?
My first call is to Prime Minister of New Zealand, who said that her goal is to make New Zealand the place where it's the best place in the world for a child to grow up. And I will tell her girlfriend you are so on, because the United States of America is going to be the best place in the world for a child to grow up.
Girlfriend, you are so on. Okay, so what about his claim that his mic was turned off unless he was called on? Let's take a look.
Vice President Biden, 30 seconds.
That's strange. If Yang's microphone was turned off, how could we hear him cough?
We've got a good debate so far. We're going to take a quick break.
Did I just hear Yang say something?
We've got a good debate.
But I thought his mic was supposed to be off. Must be a fluke. Yang is clearly saying something, but his mic is a little low, so it's difficult to understand him over the crowd. Again, his mic is not off, but the volume is low, and that's perfectly normal for a stage with 10 different people on it.
Bennett, you have said, quote...
So Yang made a gesture and briefly opened his mouth, but there would be no sound here, so next clip.
I'm trying to
not even waiting for our national governments to catch up.
Here, Yang isn't saying anything. He's just politely trying to get the moderator's attention.
President Biden, on the issue of how you do this.
Here, Yang holds up his hand and starts to say something, but it's too late because Rachel Maddow has already called on Joe Biden.
Thank you. Vice President Biden, on the issue of how you do this.
So, was Yang's mic turned off unless he was being called on? Absolutely not. In fact, there were at least a dozen times that Yang could have attempted to interject, but didn't.
Mr. Vice President.
While the other candidates were resting both of their hands on their podium ready to strike, Yang is oftentimes just standing there with his hand in his pocket. Not to mention that his suit jacket is unbuttoned and he's not wearing a tie. Yang's appearance and body language speaks volumes. And take a look at the difference between how Yang raises his hand to get attention versus how Bernie Sanders raises his. To get airtime, you need to put down the water bottle and get aggressive. Speaking of raising hands,
raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross a border without documentation.
By raising his hand, Yang is contradicting his stated policy. Border security along our southern border has many issues that need to be fixed to provide security for Americans and equity in our immigration system. You need look no further than the stats on how many undocumented individuals are living in the US, or the amount of drugs that have been apprehended along the border, suggesting a much larger amount that's made it through. Changing unauthorized border crossings from a crime to a civil offense just gives more incentive for people to make unauthorized border crossings. But you know what? I'm sure that Yang raised his hand by mistake and that it was all a misunderstanding.
A lot of you have been talking tonight about these government health care plans that you've proposed in one form or another. Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants. Okay.
And we're done. Thanks for watching, sharing, and hitting that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Check out the links in the description and check out these videos that you may have missed. And while you're at it, pick up a cool t-shirt like this one in my merch store. As always, thanks for stopping by, and I hope to see you next time.